Stephania, last night in the snow game. I was so excited to talk about another snow game and have it be fun talking about playing in the elements. Unfortunately, it looked like Christian McCaffrey got hurt. I went online and I saw a bunch of Twitter doctors telling me all the things that potentially happened to Christian McCaffrey. Like they for somehow know all the things that are the ins and outs of the injury before we're even able to get anything from the doctors or have any news from the team. I want to ask you, when you look at this, what is it that you can tell us about what happened to Christian McCaffrey so that we know that we're getting the right kind of information?
Well, I'll tell you what Kyle Shanahan told everyone after the game, which was that Christian McCaffrey injured his PCL, posterior cruciate ligament. You probably heard that before earlier this season when Puka Nacua injured his PCL. So, we hear about the ACL all the time. The PCL is the cruciate ligament that's posterior, so it sits behind the ACL, but also very important for knee stability. Basically, your femur or thigh bone relative to your shin bone. And when you have injury there, you feel a shifting or an instability, usually on the back side of the knee. The reason it matters compared to what we saw yesterday is I think people made an assumption that it was his Achilles. That was the immediate reaction, and everybody was watching the play where he went down and slid. But it turns out he probably was injured on a previous play. In fact, Kyle Shanahan referenced it because there was a play where he was running and it looked like he was going to get a breakaway. And he gets a shoestring tackle and he lands hard on the front of his knee. So one of the primary causes for a PCL injury is a direct blow on the front of the knee because it pushes the shin posterior relative to the thigh bone, and that's how you injure it. And when you land in snow on that surface, it's not like snow where you're, tumbling in soft snow. It's like concrete. So when you land, that's a very hard landing. He tried to come back in and he knew right away something was wrong. And I think you saw him bobble a little bit, almost looked like he stumbled or like his leg gave out. That was his body just telling him like he couldn't go, and he gave himself up, and that was the end of him for the game. As far as return time for fantasy purposes, I would say make your plans as if you may not have him the rest of the year. How they move forward will likely depend on what the evaluation, they'll get imaging, they'll have further workup on him today. And then the grade of injury and his symptoms will dictate the recovery time. And then they'll make an evaluation in the context of the season as well.
The context Stephania is referring to is the fact that this team is now 5-7. They are now 2 games back of the Seahawks for first place in the NFC West. Probably not going to see a playoff team besides the division winner from the NFC West. So if Christian McCaffrey is good to go in 3 weeks, and I'm just totally making that up, and they're 3 games out of the playoffs, they probably might say, we're good. We got to be mindful of our 28-year-old running back who, although we have seen this bounce back year for older running backs, you have to be mindful of how much wear and tear you want to put on a guy's body. Are you more determined to get him right for the start of 2025? This one sucks. There's no two ways about it. This is the player who was the face of fantasy football this season. He was the consensus first overall pick. This was the player who last year broke basically every single model. You thought you had reached your highest projection for Christian McCaffrey, and then he went out and did it even more in a season in which last year he averaged a career low in receptions per game. Christian McCaffrey was that dominant last season. And what sucks about this, on top of everything that has already been said and that we can all imagine sucks for a guy who missed the first 10 weeks of the season, comes back, is that he was finally starting to look like himself. He had 2 runs last night of at least 18 yards. His 2 longest runs of the night. And by the way, the play in which Taylor Rapp, the Bills safety, just gets a fingertip on him. If he doesn't, Christian McCaffrey house calls that baby. It's a 55-yard touchdown run. We are all sitting here saying, man, that wait was worth it. We know what the next man up in that backfield looks like. It's probably going to be Jordan Mason first. I do think because of how well Isaac Guerendo has played, he will see a bigger role than where Jordan Mason was. But for Week 14, you better expect Jordan Mason to be somewhere inside our top 25 of running backs. And until Christian McCaffrey returns, that's likely to be the case. But there's no two ways about it. It sucks in every single way. This is the risk you run in draft and playing fantasy football, right? Your star player. This is not something that is independent to Christian McCaffrey. It could have happened to anybody. It absolutely stinks. It seems like every year the player who goes number 1 overall in terms of consensus ranks faces some sort of adversity. It has been a string of incredibly bad luck, but Christian McCaffrey's season may be over.
Yeah.
I think that was the worst part. What Fields said is that, there was this question of, is he the same guy? And here he was. He'd missed so much time dealing with the lower extremity injury as a running back. It takes a little bit. And Shanahan had even addressed that earlier in the week. Like, it takes a while. You don't expect him to come out and be exactly where he left off. But he was starting to show signs of it, tripped up by, it's a game of inches, right? Because if that tackle isn't made, we're having a different conversation. And I think the other thing in terms of the context that's important is it's not just the PCL injury and how he is doing from that injury relative to the rest of the season. It's the fact that he was coming off something that cost him over half the season. And so you're looking at all of that together and saying and evaluating what you want to do going forward. That being said, for an athlete who's as competitive, and Christian McCaffrey is a different cat. I mean, his work ethic and his intensity is really on a different level. Sometimes they need to have the experience of going back on the field and knowing that they were good before they go into a long off season. So that's why I think the door remains open until we have more information.
Which will be great, obviously. So with that in mind, certainly don't drop Christian McCaffrey as we get into waivers tomorrow night, unless we get information before, tomorrow night when you go to bed that he's going to be out for the year. But it sucks in every way, shape, or form. Last thing for me, silver lining is just imagine how we talked about some of the guys coming into this season who are similar tier running backs. Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley. Saquon probably even a better example. Like, kind of down coming into this year because of a down season with some injuries last year in New York. The guy's the best player in fantasy football right now. That could be Christian McCaffrey could be the 8th pick in the draft next year because of some scar tissue from this past year, and he might be the best player in fantasy football. He is still that talented of a guy, Daniel.